Is that better? Great. Thank you. Thank you to Dr. Rima Khalaf and the other organisers of this conference for providing me with this opportunity to speak today. In Ireland, we recently commemorated an action carried out 35 years ago by a group of ordinary people known as the Dunn's Stores Strikers. These 9 supermarket workers one day decided that they would no longer handle South African produce. They would not physically handle the fruits of apartheid. And they subsequently embarked on a strike which galvanised civil society, which ultimately resulted in the Irish government imposing a ban on the import of South African produce. It was the first ban by a Western country, making a strong statement that we will not import goods from apartheid South Africa. Change led by civil society is possible. My input today is on the role of civil society organisations and youth movements in combating the Israeli apartheid regime. Because of the multiplicity of tactics and strategies that have been and are being employed by Palestinian organisations, generic civil society organisations and youth movements across the globe, I will focus on a framework that we as a civil society organisation applied to introducing groundbreaking legislation in Ireland, the learning from which can be transferred into effective mobilisation against Israeli apartheid. 10 years ago, SADACA, the Ireland-Palestine Alliance, was formed to mobilise support in Ireland for the freedom and rights of the Palestinian people. Since 2009, we have worked towards securing a ban on the importation of goods from illegal settlements. And having considered and exhausted other options, we began on the current inception of the Occupied Territories Bill in 2016. The starting point on the development of this bill was to address the only vulnerability of Israel. Israel is strategic, it's focused, it has an extraordinary publicity machine and widespread influence in most countries. It has powerful allies and apparently limitless resources. So what is its vulnerability? It breaks the law. Israel is in flagrant breach of international law on a daily and persistent basis. However, we also know that international law is limited in and of itself. There are no effective courts, no punitive measures. It is effectively a blunt instrument. But it is an instrument that we have at our disposal nonetheless, and applies a standard to which nation states are politically obliged, if not legally mandated, to adhere to. In the case of the Occupied Territories Bill, it provided us with the framework within which we could draft domestic legislation, a tangible legislative sanction around which we could craft a targeted political campaign. The Occupied Territories Bill, if and when enacted, will ban the import of goods from illegal Israeli settlements into Ireland. It has already passed the upper house of Parliament and has made global history by doing so. It has already passed the first crucial stage in the lower house of Parliament. If enacted, we believe this bill will send a strong message to the State of Israel that it can no longer breach international law with impunity. The methodology we used provides a useful template from which we can design strategies to also address Israeli apartheid. In initiating our legislation, our campaign strategy was both based on 4 key components: the involvement of legal personnel who drafted robust legislation firmly based in international law, clarity and simplicity of message. Settlements are a war crime. In trading with those settlements, we are complicit in war crimes. The message is simple and it's very difficult to object to. 3, location of the campaign at the heart of mainstream civil society and its mobilisation to influence political leaders. And 4, creation of a coalition of allies through engagement with a range of key players and stakeholders, both domestically and internationally. For the purposes of today, I will talk us through that fourth component, the creation of a global coalition of allies, this team, which has been central to the success of the campaign. The careful and strategic identification of allies is crucial in all campaign designs. Our coalition of global and domestic allies began with SADC, grew into a small core team in Ireland, and has evolved into a global web of experts and stakeholders, each of whom are playing and continue to play a critical and distinctive role. So I'll take us through those in turn. Number one, mainstream NGOs in Ireland. Mainstream and highly respected NGOs and trade unions who work to a broader agenda of social justice, inequality and international development formed the core strategy team for this legislation. Their involvement has been crucial in locating the issue of advocacy for Palestine away from dedicated pro-Palestinian organisations like ourselves and into the heart of mainstream society. Those of us who lead civil society organisations exclusively dedicated to the achievement of Palestinian rights have a responsibility to ensure that the issue of Palestine lies at the heart of mainstream society, to ensure that the Palestinian cause is not perceived as a marginal issue, is not seen as an issue of the left, is not owned by any one particular sector, but located at the heart of central society. For us, that sometimes includes tactically stepping back to enable mainstream NGOs to be the public face of the campaign. 2. Members of the Legislature and Parliament. Civil society organisations are by definition limited in what we can achieve. Regardless of the merits of our case or the strengths of our convictions, without political allies who will affect policy or legislative change, there will be little or no tangible political outcome to our work. Our role is to ensure that our elected representatives are informed on the issues, that they're well briefed with succinct evidence, that they're thanked and supported when they act constructively, and that they're challenged respectfully when they do not. Many years of advocacy work by SADC and other organisations in Ireland has helped create the political environment in which progression of this legislation was possible. As a consequence, its introduction was not viewed as a radical move, but a logical progression from previous advocacy work, which had generated multiple parliamentary debates and government policy statements on the issue of Israeli settlements. Identification of the most appropriate and effective political allies to lead on taking this legislation through the Parliament has been crucial. The political representatives we approached to lead out on taking this legislation needed to command respect on a cross-party basis, across the full political spectrum. They needed to be perceived as non-threatening and non-partisan, to be highly committed to the political objective, and crucially, they needed to have the personal and political strength to withstand intense US and Israeli pressure. And we have no doubt, but without the dedication and the commitment of the independent senator and political party we approached to take forward this legislation through the Houses of Parliament, it would remain as an abstract idea with great potential. The general public. Key to progress in the campaign has been and continues to be the ordinary citizens of Ireland galvanising support for the cause of Palestine in every domain of Irish life. This is one of the core strengths of civil society organisations. Targeted campaigns with tangible outcomes provide platforms for the engagement of individual citizens angered by the actions of the Israeli state and the inaction of our own governments. We mobilised people through social media, micro-marketing, events and established databases of supports. The types of action we requested were relatively small, but collectively were powerful. For instance, in the last couple of weeks, we have gathered 6,500 signatures from across the country that are arriving in the postbox of one politician. So one small action, but collectively powerful influence. human rights witnesses. While the context of the Fourth Geneva Convention, the Rome Statute, and other implements of international law have provided us with the framework for the legislation, it is not breaches of those in themselves which mobilise civil society into action. Ireland, like many other countries, has a strong and vibrant network of human rights witnesses who have spent time in the West Bank. These are not people who talk the language of international law when they're mobilising civil society into action. They are people who have multiple stories of families being evicted from their homes, of homes being demolished, of Palestinian families living with the everyday threat of potentially lethal violence from settlers. They tell the human story of settlements. They basically recount the devastating human cost of Israel's brutal settlement plan, and that is what mobilises civil society. Palestinian civil society organisations. Our civil society partner organisations in Palestine have been key allies and must be core to any strategy to dismantling apartheid. They not only add moral authority to our objective through their endorsement and reassurance that Palestinian civil society is fully behind the legislation, they provide substantial practical assistance in creating direct access to Palestinian society. They have been the conduit from Irish civil society to Palestinian civil society, and that link is absolutely crucial. Palestinian political leaders, leaders of all segments of Palestinian society have played a role. Those in Palestine have travelled to Ireland to meet our political leaders. That includes people like Dr. Mustafa Barghouti, who's here with us, who at one point travelled twice within 6 weeks just because we needed him. It includes people like Archbishop Atalahana, who've attended gruelling speaking tours in Ireland for numerous years to meet with our political leaders. I cannot overstate the importance of political leaders coming directly from Palestine and negotiating with our political leaders. There is no replacement for the power of that Palestinian voice. The mission in Ireland is a constant and essential ally, and Palestinian leaders in the Knesset, such as Haneen Zawabi here, have advocated also in support of the legislation. Suffice it to say, as our Parliament did not expect to receive a letter on Knesset-headed paper on the morning of the first vote, and our thanks to you for that. International leaders of influence. Insights and analysis from key political players in the international arena has served as crucial interventions. They provide context, perspective, insights into international thinking, and reassurance that action by an individual state is not only the right thing to do, it is the only thing to do to change the current trajectory. And that includes people like Dr. Rima Khalaf, who was with us on the day we announced the legislation and who has been a supportive ally to us in the intervening couple of years. Supportive Israelis. Israelis who are advocates for justice for Palestine have an important role to play, as did white South Africans in dismantling apartheid in South Africa. They are the unexpected voices, the voices that jolt the politically unaware to reflect on what must be so wrong as to engage and mobilise people whom we would naturally expect to align themselves with Israel. In the case of our bill, intervention of Israeli supporters have been game changers. Celebrity endorsement. Part of the challenge for civil society organisations is to mobilise a population into awareness and action. It's easy to preach to the converted. It's much more challenging to convince those who are politically disinterested or disaffected. One of the ways in which we can achieve this is through endorsement from sources outside the political arena, a celebrity culture, a young generation inextricably linked to social media, and media platforms with their focus on short, succinct, and primarily visual messaging present us with new challenges in political advocacy. A team of legal experts, a working group comprising experts from around the EU, is engaged in a highly rigorous process of reviewing the bill in absolute minutiae to ensure that it will not only withstand the scrutiny of the Irish legislature, but will withstand the legal challenge which will inevitably emerge at an EU level. Their role is vital, not only ensuring we get the bill through in Ireland, but to ensure its transferability to other states. Finally, there are those who have provided us with financial assistance at key points in time. Most of our work as civil society organisations is as volunteers, and that can be challenging given the formidable task. Those who have invested in us, and there's one of you in the room today, have played a hugely significant role in getting the legislation to this point, and we're very grateful for that. So to conclude, as civil society organisations, our role is to harness and channel the strength of feeling of ordinary citizens regarding Israel's colonial apartheid regime, to hold our governments to account for their responsibilities under international law, and to marry those two dimensions. Sadaka drafted the current inception of the Occupied Territories Bill in 2016. In taking it forward, we knew we were taking a risk, because a defeat at any point in time in the legislative process is effectively a victory for Israel, or certainly will be packaged as such. Yes. But we are at a point where actions, sometimes with calculated risks, need to be taken. As everybody in this room knows, and some of you painfully know, words of condemnation have not changed a single fact of life for Palestinians. Sadaka's learning in taking the bill forward is fully consistent with the aim of this conference in creating a global coalition. No one organisation or sector can possibly be successful if acting alone. Our efficacy will lie in our ability to both assume leadership, but also to create strong and effective coalitions of well-chosen partners. In conclusion, whether it's at the level of the supermarket workers I described at the outset, or the coordinated strategy that I've partially just described, not only do civil society organisations have a role to play in dismantling Israeli apartheid, we have an absolute responsibility to assume a determined and proactive role in attempting to end what has to be the greatest political injustice of our time. Thank you very much for your attention.